The test is positive, I said, my voice unnaturally calm. The little plastic stick lay on the marble countertop between us, a brutal pink line confirming the impossible. My husband, Mark, stared at it, his face turning a sickly white. He looked from the test to my face and back again, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had nothing to say. He couldn't. We both knew the truth. The one we'd lived with for 10 years. The one confirmed by 3 different specialists. Mark was sterile. His body didn't produce what was necessary for life. So he had to explain how I was pregnant. What he didn't know was that I already had the answer. The coldness started in my chest. A block of ice spreading through my veins, freezing the shock before it could shatter me. My hands had been trembling when I first saw the result, but now they were still, clenched into tight fists at my sides. The tears I felt coming moments ago evaporated, replaced by a searing, clarifying heat. This wasn't grief. This was fuel. My mind flashed back, a quick, painful montage of my sacrifices. I remembered working 2 jobs while he finished his master's degree, my hands raw from serving tables at night after a full day as a paralegal. I remembered selling my father's vintage watch, the last thing I had of his, to help with the down payment on this very house, the house he now stood in, looking at me with the eyes of a stranger and a liar. I remembered every invasive fertility treatment I put my body through, every injection, every failed attempt, all because he begged me, saying a child would complete us, all while knowing it was his problem, not mine. He let me mutilate my hope, month after month. He finally spoke, his voice a pathetic stammer. It must be a mistake, a false positive. He reached for me, but I took a step back. Honey, we know this isn't possible. It was the we that did it, the casual lie, the assumption that I was still on his team, that I was a fool. That's when my eyes landed on the old leather briefcase tucked beside his desk. It was his father's, a family heirloom he never used. Last week, I'd been looking for a stamp and opened it on a whim. Tucked into a side pocket was a document he told me he'd lost years ago. It wasn't lost. It was hidden. It was the original, signed report from his urologist confirming a successful vasectomy, dated 6 months before he even proposed to me. He had never been sterile because of a medical condition. He had been surgically sterilized, by choice, and had lied about it for our entire marriage. The shock didn't break me. It transformed me. The ice in my chest crystallized into resolve, and the tears hardened into a meticulously constructed plan. He had built our life on a lie, and I would demolish it with the truth. The first thing I did was visit my lawyer, not a divorced lawyer. I needed a predator. I went to the sharpest financial litigator in the city, a woman named Evelyn Shaw, whose reputation was built on dismantling fraudulent empires. Her office was all cool glass and steel, a fortress of logic. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My tears had been incinerated by a colder, more useful fire. I sat in the sleek leather chair opposite her and opened my bag. Not a purse, a weapons case. I laid out the evidence with the calm precision of a bomb disposal expert. First, the vasectomy report. I watched her eyes scan the date, her professional mask giving way to a flicker of cold fury. Then, my own pristine fertility records, a testament to the years of unnecessary torture I'd endured. The final pieces were the bank statements. I'd highlighted the large, unexplained business withdrawals Mark had been making for the past year. They were regular, greedy, and brazen. He's been siphoning our joint funds, I said, my voice flat. And he's not working alone. His brother Daniel is involved. They're moving money, preparing for something. Evelyn leaned forward, her fingers steepled. This is beyond divorce. This is fraud, conspiracy. The vasectomy document alone establishes a decade of deception for financial gain. Everything he has, everything you've built together, is potentially built on this lie. A grim satisfaction settled in my chest. This was what I'd come for. My mission isn't just to leave him, I clarified, my gaze steady. It's to reclaim every single thing he has taken from me under false pretenses. Every dollar I earned that went into that house, every piece of my soul I invested in a future he knew was a fiction. I want it all back. Evelyn nodded, a slow, predatory smile touching her lips. Good, then we don't react. We draw them out. We make them believe they've won. Their confidence is their weakness. She outlined a strategy that was as brutal as it was beautiful. We would freeze the joint accounts, but quietly, leaving just enough rope for them to hang themselves. We would document every transaction, every communication. We would let them think their plan was still a secret. They'll get desperate, she said, and desperate men make mistakes. They'll try to move faster, to secure the funds they think are theirs. That's when we'll have them. I left her office feeling lighter, not with happiness, but with purpose. The block of ice in my chest now had a shape, a blueprint. I wasn't a victim navigating a tragedy. I was a general preparing the battlefield. The game was on, but Mark and Daniel didn't know they were players yet. They still thought they were the architects. My next stop was the bank. I met with the manager, a man named Mr. Higgins, who had always been overly friendly with Mark. I didn't wear my anger. I wore my best performance of a confused, hopeful wife. I told him Mark and I were planning a surprise investment for our family, a new beginning, and that I needed to understand the flow of our finances to make sure everything was perfect. I fluttered my lashes, spoke of miracles and second chances. He ate it up, happily providing printouts and clarifying transaction details, completely oblivious that he was handing me the nails for their coffin. As I walked out into the afternoon sun, the folder of evidence tucked securely under my arm, I felt a strange sense of peace. This was the beginning, the first move in a game of chess where I could see the entire board, and they were still fumbling with the pieces. He thought my pregnancy was a crisis. It was my camouflage. He thought my silence was grief. It was my strategy. The war they started was now being fought on my terms, and I was just getting started. The performance of my life began that night. I prepared a meal he loved, a recipe his mother had given me during what I thought were happier times. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the house, a familiar, comforting aroma that now felt like a weapon. When he walked in, I was at the stove, my shoulders slightly slumped. I made sure my eyes were red. A few drops of saline solution before he arrived worked wonders. "I made your favorite," I said, my voice a fragile thread. He approached, his face a mask of cautious relief. "You're feeling better." I let a single, perfect tear trace a path down my cheek. "I don't know what I'm feeling. It's all so confusing." "A miracle, right?" I forced a wobbly smile. "We should see Dr. Evans together. Maybe he can help us understand this." Blessing. The word blessing tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was the word he wanted to hear. His arms came around me, and I let him. I buried my face in his shoulder, the wool of his sweater scratchy against my skin. His hands rubbed my back, a gesture that had once felt like safety, and now felt like a violation. I pictured his bank accounts draining, his smug smile wiped clean. I imagined him homeless. The image was the only thing that kept me from shoving him away. "We'll figure it out, honey," he murmured into my hair, his voice dripping with a condescension I now heard with perfect clarity. Together, I cried at dinner, real tears, summoned from a deep well of genuine pain, not for the loss of our marriage, but for the loss of the woman I had been, the trusting, hopeful fool who believed in his lies. I let the tears fall into my mashed potatoes. I saw him watching me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought my tears were for him, for us, for the shattered illusion of our life. He was so wrong. My grief was the perfect bait, and he was swallowing it whole. The next morning, I accidentally knocked over a full glass of orange juice onto his laptop. As he scrambled to save it, cursing, I offered him my old tablet to use for the day. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I'm just a mess." He took it, annoyed but unsuspecting. I had already installed a keystroke logger on it. Every password, every email, every secret he typed was now mine. His carelessness was a beautiful thing to behold. He started leaving his phone on the coffee table, screen unlocked, when he went to shower. He took calls in his home office, but he no longer bothered to close the door completely. I'd stand in the hallway, a silent ghost, listening to the low murmur of his voice. Then, one evening, I heard it. The name, Daniel. His brother, his partner in everything. Of course, it was always Daniel, the charismatic, reckless one who had always looked at me with a thinly veiled resentment, as if I were an obstacle to their grander plans. I pressed my back against the cool wall, holding my breath. "She's completely broken," Mark said, a laugh in his voice. "It's almost pathetic, talking about miracles and doctors." Daniel's tinny laugh echoed from the speakerphone. "I told you, she'd fold. They always do. Just keep her calm until the paperwork on the new venture is finalized. Her inheritance is the key, Mark. Without that safety net, this whole thing is too risky." "She forgive me," Mark said, his voice dripping with an arrogance that made my blood sing with cold fury. "She loves me. She'll see this baby as a sign, and her money will be our leverage. We'll be untouchable." They were laughing about my pain, my trust, my money. They were planning to use my own inheritance, the last piece of my father, as collateral for their gamble. The ice in my chest didn't melt. It crystallized into something harder, sharper. My tears had dried up for good. Now, there was only the quiet, methodical work of building the trap. They thought I was broken. They thought I was weak. They were about to learn that the quietest prey often has the deadliest bite. Their confidence was a drug, and they were both high on it. It made them sloppy. It made them stupid. It made them perfect. Just as I predicted, their assurance curdled into pure, unadulterated arrogance. Mark, who used to guard his phone like a state secret, now left it lying around like a piece of junk mail. I'd see it on the kitchen counter, screen dark but unlocked, a testament to how little he thought of me now. He saw my red-rimmed eyes, my hesitant suggestions for couples counseling, my performance of a woman clinging to the wreckage of her marriage, and he bought it completely. He thought my grief had neutered me. I played my part to perfection. I'd bring him a cup of coffee, my hand trembling just enough to make the china saucer rattle. "Maybe it's a miracle, Mark," I'd whisper, my voice thick with feigned hope. "Maybe God finally heard us." He would pat my hand, his touch like a snake's skin, and give me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe, honey, we should be grateful." The "we" was a knife twist every time. He was too triumphant, too eager to share the victory with his partner. I became a ghost in my own home, a silent phantom listening from the hallway, my back pressed against the cool wall, my breathing shallow. The first time I heard Daniel's name, a jolt went through me. Of course, it was always Daniel. "She's completely broken," Mark said one evening, his voice a low, gloating murmur. I could picture him leaning back in his leather chair, the master of his crumbling universe. "It's almost pathetic. She's talking about miracles and doctors." Daniel's laugh crackled through the speakerphone, a harsh, ugly sound. "I told you she'd fold. They always do. Just keep her calm until the paperwork on the new venture is finalized. Her inheritance is the key, Mark. Without that safety net, this whole thing is too risky." My inheritance, the money my father had worked his entire life to leave me, the final piece of me they planned to devour. I felt a cold sweat break out on my palms, but I didn't move. "She'll forgive me," Mark declared, his voice dripping with a certainty that made my stomach churn. "She loves me. She'll see this baby as a sign, and her money will be our leverage. We'll be untouchable." They were laughing, actually laughing. The sound was a physical blow, but it didn't hurt. It forged me, the last vestiges of any sentimental feeling I might have harbored for the man I'd married evaporated in the heat of their mockery. They weren't just stealing from me. They were enjoying it. My pain was their entertainment. My trust was their joke. That night, after Mark was asleep, breathing the deep, untroubled breaths of the truly wicked, I went to work. In the blue glow of my laptop, I was no longer the broken wife. I was an architect. I created an email address under a fake name. I drafted a professional, enticing letter from a fictional investment firm, Apex Venture Partners, talking about a groundbreaking, pre-IPO tech startup in the sustainability sector. I used all the right buzzwords, painted a picture of staggering, guaranteed returns. I made it sound like the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of golden ticket, arrogant, greedy men like Mark and Daniel would kill for. The next morning, I printed the prospectus on high-quality paper. I didn't hide it. I left it in plain sight on the kitchen table, right next to the fruit bowl. I made sure a few key phrases were visible. Exclusive opportunity, minimum investment, $200,000, projected 300% return. Then I went for a walk. I needed to be gone when he found it. I needed him to believe the discovery was his alone, a secret he could share with his brother. A conspiracy for two. When I returned, the prospectus was gone from the table. I found it later, tucked into Mark's briefcase. A corner of it, dog. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. The bait had been taken. The hook was set. They were swimming straight into my net, convinced they were the cleverest sharks in the water. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my tears were surrendered. They had no idea that every sob they heard was just another brick being laid in the prison I was building for them. The trap wasn't just set, it was baited with their own greed. The burner phone felt cool and anonymous in my hand, a weapon of pure intention. I worked through the night, my fingers flying across the keyboard in the silent house. I wasn't a wife, I was a phantom. I built Apex Venture Partners from the digital ground up, a sleek, professional website with stock photos of smiling, diverse teams in glass-walled offices. I wrote copy filled with the kind of jargon that made mediocre men feel brilliant. Disruptive synergy, scalability, returns. I created a dummy landing page for Viridian Core, a fake tech startup claiming to have a revolutionary water purification system. It was the perfect lure for two men who loved to talk about saving the world while they picked its pockets. The prospectus was my masterpiece. I printed it on heavy linen finished paper that felt important. I used a font that whispered exclusivity and wealth. The numbers were a work of art, projecting a 300% return within 18 months. I made it just complex enough to seem legitimate, but just simple enough for their avarice to easily comprehend the central message. You will get very, very rich. I left it on the cold marble of the kitchen island the next morning. A single, pristine document placed right where Mark would set down his coffee. I made sure the bolded $200,000 minimum investment was facing up. Then I performed my part. I let my shoulders slump. I made my eyes red and puffy from a carefully applied drop of menthol ointment. I was the picture of shattered despair, too lost in my own hormonal grief to notice a simple business document. I left the house, telling Mark I was going to my mother's for the day. I needed to be absent for the discovery, for the conspiracy to bloom between the two brothers without the dampening presence of their victim. I spent 3 hours sitting in a library, watching the minute hand crawl around the clock, my heart a steady, cold drumbeat of anticipation. When I returned, the air in the house was different. It was charged with a suppressed, excited energy. The prospectus was gone. Mark was in his study, on the phone, his voice a low, enthusiastic murmur. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew the tone. It was the sound of a fish seeing the shiny lure and thinking it had found a free meal. I found the prospectus later that evening, not just tucked away, but studied. It was in Mark's briefcase, but now it bore the marks of the corners were slightly bent, sections were highlighted in yellow. Daniel's messy scrawl filled the margins with notes like leverage the inheritance and ask about board seat. They had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. They were dissecting my phantom, planning its future, and salivating over the fortune they would make with the money they had stolen from me. That night, they didn't even try to hide their conversation. They thought I was asleep, drowned in tears and self-pity. From the top of the stairs, I listened to them in the living room below, their voices thick with triumph and cheap whiskey. It's a lock, Mark, Daniel slurred. This is it. This is how we finally get out from under and make it all ours. It's almost poetic, using her potential inheritance to fund this. I know, Mark replied, his voice slick with satisfaction. I told you, brother, patience. We play the long game, and the rewards fall right into our laps. She's so busy crying over a baby that doesn't exist. She doesn't even see the real fortune right in front of her. I closed my eyes, letting their words wash over me. They weren't just thieves, they were gluttons. Their arrogance was the final component, the fuel that would power their own destruction. They saw my silence as weakness. They saw my grief as an opportunity. They truly believed they were the smartest men in the room, the masterminds of their own destiny. They had no idea they were just mice in a maze, and I was the one who had built every single corridor, every dead end. They were about to pour every stolen cent, every dollar of their own savings, into a black hole I had personally designed. They were running toward a finish line that didn't exist, and I was waiting for them there, ready to collect. The transfer notifications lit up my screen like a string of firecrackers. Each one was a tiny, digital victory. I sat in the dark of my home office, the blue glow of the monitor the only light, and watched the final act of their greed unfold in real time. First, it was the $150,000 from our joint savings, the account I'd bled for. Mark moved it with the click of a mouse, his password still saved in my browser from a week ago when he'd asked me to print a boarding pass. He thought he was so clever. He was just convenient. Then came the $200,000 from their so-called business capital, money I knew was laced with my own inheritance, filtered through shell companies Daniel had set up. The final blow was the $125,000 from their personal savings. They were all in. They had liquidated everything, betting their entire kingdom on my phantom throne. The total glowed on the screen, $475,000. It was almost the exact amount they had systematically stolen from me over the last 3 years. It was all coming home. For 48 hours, I let them marinate in their own triumph. I played my part perfectly. I made them a celebratory dinner, pushing a piece of salmon around my plate while they toasted to their vision and foresight. Mark patted my hand, his touch making my skin crawl. This is for our future, honey, for the baby. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I gave him a watery, grateful smile, the perfect picture of a clueless, dependent wife. The moment the final wire cleared, the clock started. I gave it 12 more hours. I let them sleep, dreaming of private jets and beach houses. I didn't sleep at all. I was too busy executing the final, beautiful steps of their ruin. At exactly 9:01 a.m., when they would be sitting in Daniel's office, eagerly waiting for a confirmation call from their new partners, I pulled the plug. With a few keystrokes, I took the Ethereum Ventures website offline. It vanished from the internet as if it had never existed. The professional email address bounced back. The dedicated phone line I'd set up rang into a dead void. I had a live feed from the hidden camera in Daniel's office, a tiny, undetectable lens in the smoke detector I'd planted during a charitable visit to drop off old files. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the rich, bitter scent a perfect accompaniment to the scene about to unfold. I watched the screen. Mark was the one who tried the number first. He put his phone on speaker. "The number you have dialed is not in service." A faint line appeared between his brows. Daniel chuckled. A nervous sound. Probably just a glitch. Their IT guys are probably swamped. He refreshed the website. Error 404. Page not found. The chuckle died in his throat. The air in the room, even through a digital screen, changed. It became thick, heavy, with the first stirrings of a primal fear. Daniel started typing frantically, his fingers slamming against the keyboard. Mark tried the number again and again, his voice rising from confused to sharp with alarm with each failed attempt. "It's gone," Daniel whispered, his face ashen. "It's all just gone." The panic didn't bloom. It detonated. Mark shot up from his chair, his movements jerky. "What do you mean, gone? That's not possible. Check the bank routing number. Maybe we sent it to the wrong place." But they hadn't. The account was real. It was just mine. They started yelling at each other, a chaotic symphony of blame and terror. Papers flew. Mark slammed his fist on the desk, making the monitor jump. I saw the exact moment the true, horrifying scope of their catastrophe dawned on them. It wasn't a technical error. It wasn't a delay. They had been played. Mark's face collapsed. All the color drained away, leaving a sickly, gray pallor. His eyes, usually so full of smug superiority, were wide with the raw, uncomprehending shock of an animal caught in a trap. He looked at his brother, and for a single, breathtaking moment, I saw pure, undiluted hatred pass between them. The Golden Boys were tarnishing, in real time, their alliance cracking under the weight of $500,000 of nothing. I leaned closer to my screen, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. This was the moment. This was the harvest. Their panic, their terror, their utter, complete devastation. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was a masterpiece, and I was the artist. I took a long, savoring sip of my coffee. It tasted like victory. I watched the money vanish from their accounts, a digital ghost I had conjured. The silence in my study was a stark contrast to the frantic chaos I knew was erupting in my husband's home office. I imagined the sweat on Mark's brow, the desperate, guttural sounds Daniel would be making. The image was a balm on a decade-old wound. But a single victory, no matter how sweet, wasn't the end of the war. I needed more. I needed the foundation of their world to crumble. And for that, I needed an insider. She came to me on a Tuesday afternoon. The doorbell chimed, a soft, polite sound that felt alien in the tomb our house had become. I opened the door to find Eleanor standing there, her posture as regal as ever, but her eyes were a battlefield of shame and resolve. She clutched a large manila envelope so tightly her knuckles were white. "Clara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, my own heart a cold, hard drum. This was the woman who had welcomed me into her family, who had cried with me over my failed pregnancies. I had prepared for her to be another enemy, a lioness defending her cubs. I was ready for that fight. I wasn't ready for this. She didn't sit. She stood in the center of the living room, amidst the expensive, sterile furniture Mark had chosen, and looked at me with a devastating clarity. "I have suspected for a long time," she began, her gaze dropping to the envelope in her hands. "A mother knows the sound of her son's lies, the way they spoke about you, about your money. It never sat right. It was too hungry." She held out the envelope. I took it, the paper feeling like a live wire in my hands. "I went through Daniel's home office yesterday," she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of steel. "He was always the careless one. Mark is the snake, but Daniel is the loud, clumsy foot that crushes the grass. He left his old laptop unlocked, She let out a shaky breath. I found these. I think you need to see them. I opened the flap and slid the contents onto the glass coffee table. They were printouts of emails. The first one was dated over a decade ago, months before my wedding. The subject line was chillingly simple. The long game. My eyes scanned the text. The ice in my chest spreading, hardening into diamond. Asterisk mark. She's perfect. Trust fund is even larger than we thought. Her father's life insurance payout is locked in a portfolio, but it'll be hers outright in a few years. The prenup is standard, but with the infertility struggle, we can start siphoning from the joint accounts for medical costs. She'll never question it. She's too trusting. Asterisk Daniel. You're sure she's clueless? Asterisk mark. Positive. I'm the grieving, sterile husband. She's the devoted wife. It's the perfect cover. By the time she figures it out, we'll have bled her dry and her inheritance will be our safety net. It's foolproof. Asterisk. I kept reading, my breath a steady, cold rhythm in my lungs. Email after email, a detailed blueprint of my financial and emotional destruction. They discussed the best ways to manipulate me, to play on my sympathy. They joked about the fertility treatments, calling them a costly but necessary performance to keep me trapped in the narrative of our tragic, shared problem. They had planned it all. From the very first date, it had all been a transaction. A con. I looked up at Eleanor. Her face was streaked with silent tears, but her jaw was set. They are my sons, she said, her voice cracking with a grief I now understood was for the men they should have been. But this is evil. I will not be an accessory to it. I choose you. In that moment, she wasn't my mother. She was a fellow survivor, holding a torch to the pyre. She had handed me the final, irrefutable weapon, not just evidence of a recent crime, but the proof that the entire foundation of my marriage, every I love you, every whispered hope in the dark, had been a calculated lie designed to enrich them. I placed a hand on her arm, a gesture of solidarity that felt both strange and utterly necessary. Thank you, Eleanor. She nodded, a single, sharp movement. What will you do? The cold smile that touched my lips was genuine. I looked at the damning emails, then back at her. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. A family dinner. The house was silent, a hollowed-out shell waiting for the final act. With their money secured in my account and irrefutable proof from their own mother, my plan was complete. It was a beautiful, brutal machine, and I was about to throw the switch. I scheduled a family crisis dinner. My voice on the phone to Mark was a masterpiece of strained panic. We need to talk. It's about the baby ... and money. I'm just so scared. He ate it up, his tone dripping with condescending concern. Of course, honey, Daniel and I will be right over. We'll figure this out. Of course, Daniel was coming. The partner in crime. Perfect. I spent the day not in frantic preparation, but in a state of serene, focused calm. I moved through the rooms of the house he thought he owned, the marble and hardwood he'd purchased with my sacrifice. I didn't feel like a ghost there anymore. I felt like its new owner. The dining room table, a massive slab of oak we'd bought for entertaining, became my war room. I didn't just throw the evidence down. I curated it. I arranged the documents into neat, damning piles, a chronological map of their downfall. It was a gallery of their sins, and I was the curator. The first pile was the foundation of the lie, the original, signed vasectomy report. I placed it deliberately to the left. Next to it, I laid my own fertility records, a stark contrast of his deliberate infertility against my perfect, exploited biology. Then came the financials, bank statements, highlighted in yellow, tracing the large, unexplained withdrawals from our joint accounts. I could almost smell the expensive cigars and cheap whiskey they'd bought with my inheritance. The centerpiece was Eleanor's gift, the printed emails, their casual cruelty preserved in black and white. I'd bookmarked the most vicious ones. She's too trusting. It's the perfect cover. We'll have bled her dry. I wanted their own words to stare back at them. Finally, on the right, the grand finale. The transaction records from my fake investment firm, the proof that they had willingly, greedily, poured nearly $500,000 of their stolen and personal money into my phantom company. I had the confirmation from the bank. The funds were mine, irrevocably. That pile wasn't just paper. It was their financial tombstone. I set the table for 4 with our best china. The irony was, a spice I could taste. I placed a crystal water glass at each setting. My hands were steady. My breath was even. This wasn't anxiety. This was anticipation. The hunter waiting in the blind. An hour before they were due, I did one last thing. I took the small voice-activated recorder from my pocket. Its twin was already planted in the living room, but this one was my personal insurance. I slid it into the centerpiece, a large, hollowed-out vase of fresh white lilies, their favorite flower. Let them be the audience for their own confession. Then, I waited. I stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. It felt like the world was putting on a show just for me. The calm before the storm wasn't a passive state. It was a gathering of power. It was the deep breath before the executioner's axe falls. I heard the key in the lock, Mark's key. The sound that had once meant comfort now signified the arrival of the enemy. I didn't move from the window. Let them find me here. Let them see my silhouette.com, and composed against the dying light. The front door opened. "Honey, we're here," Mark called out, his voice a practiced blend of worry and authority. I heard Daniel's heavier footsteps behind him. I finally turned. I offered them a small, tired smile, the smile of a confused, pregnant wife. "I'm in the dining room," I said, my voice soft. "We need to sit down." They exchanged a glance, a quick, knowing look I was now fluent in. They thought this was about comforting me, about managing my hysterics. They thought they were walking into a negotiation. They had no idea they were walking into their own trial. The judge, jury, and executioner was already in the room, and she was ready to pass sentence. They filed into the dining room, Mark leading with that furrowed brow look of concern he'd perfected, Daniel trailing behind him like a smug shadow. They saw the table, the neat, damning piles of paper, and their steps faltered for a fraction of a second. The performance was already beginning. "Sit down," I said. My voice was flat, a calm lake hiding a tsunami beneath the surface. Mark tried to reach for my hand. "Sweetheart, what's all this? We're here to support you, not have some inquisition." I pulled my hand back, placing it flat on the table. I said, "Sit down." They sat, exchanging another one of those glances. Daniel rolled his eyes, already bored with what he assumed was my emotional theatrics. They thought this was my breakdown. They were about to learn it was their autopsy. I picked up the first document. The paper was cool and smooth between my fingers. I slid it across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of Mark. "This is the original urologist's report," I said, my tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "The one you told me you lost, dated 6 months before you proposed. It confirms your vasectomy was a complete success." Mark's face went from concerned to ashen. His jaw tightened. "Where did you get that?" That's a forgery. You're not well. You're confused." "I'm perfectly clear," I interrupted, sliding the second pile toward Daniel. "These are the bank statements. All those business investments and consultant fees you two funneled out of our joint accounts. The money I earned. It's all there. Every cent you stole." Daniel's smugness evaporated. He stared at the numbers, his eyes darting back and forth as if he could make them change. "This is a violation of privacy. You have no right." "I have every right," I said softly. "It was my money." I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching the first real flicker of fear ignite in their eyes. The fortress of their lies was beginning to crack. "And these," I continued, placing the third, most beautiful stack between them, "are printouts of your emails. All the planning, the scheming, how you'd bleed the cow dry before I even suspected a thing. Your mother was kind enough to provide these." The color drained from Mark's face so completely I thought he might pass out. "My mother?" "No, yes." The word was a final nail. "She chose justice." Now came the masterstroke. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I made a show of tapping the screen, my movements slow, deliberate. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted them to know what was coming. "The evidence speaks for itself," I said, "but I thought you might appreciate hearing it from the original source." I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear, thanks to the recorder nestled in the lilies. Their voices filled the silent dining room, loud and unmistakable. Daniel's laugh, a harsh, grating sound, and she still thinks it's some kind of miracle. After all, the doctor's Mark's voice, dripping with condescension. "She's so desperate to believe. It's pathetic. She'll sign anything to keep her family together. Her inheritance will cover our losses on the Henderson deal, and then some. We'll be set. We fooled her for 10 years, Mark, 10 years. She never had a clue. The best part is, she thinks I'm the victim here, that I'm struggling with my infertility. She's comforting me." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was the sound of their world collapsing. Mark was staring at the table, his shoulders slumped, defeated. Daniel looked like a caged animal, his eyes wild, searching for an escape that didn't exist. You recorded us, Mark whispered, his voice ragged. I did. I leaned forward, finally letting the ice in my veins show in my eyes. You built our life on a lie. You let me blame my body. You let me suffer. You stole from me. You laughed about it. I stood up, looking down at them. They were small, insignificant. This isn't a discussion, I said, my voice cold and sharp as a scalpel. This is an announcement. Your game is over. I know everything, and now, so will everyone else. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving them surrounded by the ruins of their own making. I didn't need to see their faces anymore. The sound of their silence was victory enough. The trial was over. The sentencing was about to begin. The fallout was immediate and public. My mother-in-law, a respected figure in their community, made sure of it. She didn't just whisper to a few friends. She launched a campaign. Eleanor, with her impeccable reputation and steely resolve, became my most powerful weapon. She made calls. She sent emails. She provided documents to the right people. She was a mother avenging the betrayal of her own child, and she was terrifying in her efficiency. News of their fraud and betrayal spread like wildfire, fanned by the hurricane-force winds of her disappointment. I watched it all from the quiet eye of the storm I had created. Business partners I'd shared dinners with for years sent terse, formal emails severing ties. Their company's phone, which used to ring incessantly with new deals, fell silent. Then came the official letters, notifications that their professional licenses were under review for ethical violations. The very foundations of their identities, the successful businessmen, the trusted advisors, were crumbling into dust. The social death was even more spectacular. Friends they had known their whole lives turned their backs. Invitations to the country club were rescinded. I'd scroll through social media and see photos from gatherings we would have been at the center of, and there would be a conspicuous, beautiful emptiness where they should have been. They weren't just exposed. They were erased, scrubbed from the world they had so carefully built on a foundation of my broken spirit. I received a call from Daniel's now ex-fiancée, Sarah. Her voice was thick with tears, but they weren't for him. He told me you were unstable, she said, the words tumbling out in a relieved rush. He said you were jealous of our relationship and might try to cause trouble. I almost believed him. Thank you. Thank you for showing me the monster before I married him. That was the true victory. It wasn't just about the money or the assets. It was about dismantling their reality. The false narrative they had constructed, where they were the clever masters of the universe, and I was the pathetic, gullible wife. I had rewritten the story, and in my version, they were the villains, and villains get punished. My lawyer, a brilliant, unflappable woman named Clara, delivered the final, exquisite checkmate. She arranged a meeting in her office, a sterile, modern space that felt like an operating room. Mark and Daniel were already there when I entered, looking shrunken in their expensive suits. They smelled of desperation and cheap coffee. Clara didn't smile. She placed 2 documents on the polished table between us. You have a choice, she said, her voice cool and clean. Option 1. We file criminal charges for felony fraud and embezzlement. We have the bank records, the emails from your mother, and the audio recording. The district attorney is very interested. You will be convicted. You will go to prison. Mark flinched as if she'd struck him. Daniel just stared at the floor, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Option 2, Clara continued, sliding the documents forward. You sign this. It is a legally binding, public confession to your entire scheme. It requires you to repay every stolen cent, with 20% interest, calculated from the date of each initial withdrawal. It also stipulates the immediate transfer of your combined shares in the family business to your client, as restitution for emotional distress and reputational damage under the false pretenses of your marriage. Furthermore, you relinquish any and all claims to the marital home, vehicles, and any other shared assets. You walk away with your freedom, but with nothing else. It was a complete and total surrender. It was more than I had even dared to dream of in those first, icy moments of discovery. You can't be serious, Daniel spat, finally looking up. This is robbery. No, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. This is the bill. For 10 years of my life. For every tear I cried thinking my body had failed you. For every sacrifice I made for a lie. You can pay it now, in money and pride, or you can pay it later, in years spent in a cage. the choice is yours. I watched the fight drain out of them. They were cornered, and they knew it. Their own mother was prepared to testify against them. They had no allies, no money for a protracted legal battle, and no reputation left to defend. Mark picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He didn't look at me. He just scrawled his name on the line. The signature a pathetic, sloppy thing. After a long, tense moment, Daniel did the same. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the sound of my liberation being finalized. Clara gathered the documents. I'll have these filed by the end of the day. I stood up and walked to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The scent of their defeat was enough. The trial was over. The sentencing was complete. And I was the judge, the jury, and the victorious executioner. My lawyer, Clara, delivered the final checkmate. Her voice was like polished steel, each word a hammer blow on the anvil of their fate. You have a choice, she said, sliding 2 copies of the document across the gleaming conference table. Faced felony fraud and embezzlement charges, with your own mother prepared to serve as the state's star witness. Or, you signed this. The confession was a masterpiece of legal destruction. It required them to repay every stolen cent with a punitive interest rate that made my head spin. It demanded they sign over their shares in the family business to me, the very enterprise they had planned to leverage with my stolen inheritance, and it forced them to relinquish any and all claims to our house, the cars, the investments, everything. It was a complete and total surrender. It was more than I had even dared to dream of in those first, icy moments of discovery. Mark's face was a gray mask of shock. Daniel, sitting beside him, looked like a caged animal, his eyes darting from the document to Clara, to me, searching for a weakness that no longer existed. You can't be serious, Daniel spat, finally finding his voice. It was ragged, raw with a fury he could no longer contain. This is robbery. No, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room, silencing his outburst. All eyes turned to me. This is the bill, itemized, for 10 years of my life. For every tear I cried, thinking my body had failed you. For every injection, every procedure, every shred of hope I sacrificed on the altar of your lie. I leaned forward, my gaze locking onto Mark's. For selling my father's watch to help buy a house for a man who had already ensured I would never give him a child. You can pay it now, in money and pride, or you can pay it later, in years spent in a cage. The choice is yours. I watched the fight drain out of them. It was a physical thing, a deflation. Mark's shoulders slumped, his head bowing. Daniel's clenched fists slowly uncurled on the tabletop. They were cornered, and they knew it. Their own mother was in the next room, ready to eviscerate them on the stand. They had no allies, no money for a protracted legal battle, and no reputation left to defend. The world they had so carefully built was already ash, and this document was just the wind scattering the last of it. Mark picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly the plastic clicked against the wood of the table. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He just scrawled his name on the line, the signature a pathetic, sloppy thing that bore no resemblance to the confident flourish he used on our marriage license. The sound was deafening in the silent room. A scratch, a surrender. After a long, tense moment where Daniel seemed to wrestle with his own extinction, he let out a low guttural sound of defeat and snatched the other pen. He signed with a violent slash, as if hoping to tear through the paper and the reality it represented. Clara gathered the documents, her movements efficient and final. I'll have these filed by the end of the day. I stood up. The leather chair didn't make a sound as I pushed it back. I smoothed the front of my dress, a simple, elegant black shift I had bought for this exact moment. I didn't look at the broken men at the table. I didn't need to. I could feel their devastation, a cold radiation emanating from them. The scent of their defeats, our sweat and shattered arrogance was enough. It was the perfume of my liberation. I walked to the door, my heels clicking a steady, deliberate rhythm on the hardwood floor. I placed my hand on the cool brass knob. The trial was over. The sentencing was complete. And I had been the judge, the jury, and the victorious executioner. I opened the door and stepped out into the bright, free hallway, leaving the ruins of their lives behind me without a single backward glance. The fall was swift and brutal. It was also beautiful. I watched it from a distance, a curator observing a masterpiece of ruin. They lost everything, just as I had planned, but their loss was my restoration. The house was the first to go. My house, the one I'd bought with the last piece of my father. The for sale sign went up, and I made sure the listing agent was a friend of mine. She sent me photos of the final walkthrough. Mark and Daniel were there, hollow-eyed, boxing up the cheap remnants of their lives. They had to sell the furniture, the art, even the expensive espresso machine Mark had always prized. It all went to pay back a fraction of what they owed me. I heard through the grapevine that they fought over a silver picture frame, their voices echoing in the empty rooms that had once held my dreams. The sound of their crumbling brotherhood was a symphony. The cars were repossessed a week later. I was parked across the street when the tow truck came from Mark's sleek, black sedan. He stood on the curb in a stained t-shirt, pleading with the driver, his voice cracking. I rolled down my window just enough to hear his desperation. It was the same tone he'd used when he'd lied to me about the baby. It tasted like justice. Their careers evaporated. The news of their fraud, meticulously leaked by my mother-in-law to their most influential clients, spread through the business community like a virus. Partners dissolved contracts. Licenses were suspended pending investigations that would never end in their favor. They were toxic. I had a Google alert set up for their names, and every day a new notification would pop up: another business disassociation. Another article about the fall from grace of the once promising brothers. I'd read them over my morning tea, the words like a warm, soothing balm. They became ghosts. The golden boys of the country club set were now social pariahs, a cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties. Did you hear about the Miller brothers? People would murmur, their voices, a mix of shock and vicious glee. Swindled his own wife, and the mother testified against them. Can you imagine? I didn't have to imagine. I had orchestrated it. I took a certain dark pleasure in the small details of their destruction. I heard Daniel's fiancée left him, returning the ring in a certified envelope. I learned Mark had to move into a cramped, furnished apartment on the bad side of town, the kind with thin walls and the constant smell of stale cigarettes. They were forced to sell their watches, their golf clubs, the meaningless trophies of their fraudulent success. Every item they let go of was another brick I reclaimed to rebuild my own walls. They tried to contact me, of course. My phone would buzz with calls from unknown numbers. My email inbox would get pathetic, rambling messages begging for mercy, for a second chance, for me to see the pressure they were under. I never responded. I just forwarded the emails to my lawyer and blocked the numbers. Their words were meaningless noise. The only language that mattered now was the one I had written in legal documents and bank transfers. The final, beautiful twist was the business. With their shares signed over to me, I walked into their family company, not as a victim, but as the majority owner. My mother-in-law, a formidable ally, stood by my side. Together, we purged the place of their shadow. We implemented new ethical guidelines, fired the sycophants they'd hired, and redirected the company's focus. It became profitable, truly profitable, without the stench of their schemes. The business their father built, the one they tried to use to destroy me, became my greatest asset. It was the cradle for my new life, and the final, unmarked grave for theirs. Their world was ash, and I was the one who had burned it all down, not in a blind rage, but with the cold, precise application of truth. I had taken their brutal, calculated betrayal, and I had weaponized it. They had started this war, believing I was weak, but they never understood. You don't bring a lie to a fight with the truth. The truth always, always wins. The for sale sign went up on the lawn of the House of Lies, and I felt nothing but a cool, clean satisfaction. I didn't look back as I drove away from that marble and misery for the last time. The new place was smaller, a cottage-style home with a porch that caught the morning sun. The first thing I did was paint the walls a warm, buttery yellow. No more cold, sterile whites. This house would be filled with light, not deception. The money from the sale, combined with the funds I'd reclaimed from their disastrous investment, gave me a fortress of financial security. But the real victory was the business. Walking into the headquarters of what was once their family empire was a power surge unlike any other. I wore a sharp, tailored suit, my posture straight, my gaze steady. The receptionist, a young woman who had once simpered at Mark, now looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. My mother-in-law Eleanor met me at the elevator. Her hand found mine and gave it a firm squeeze. "Ready, my dear?" she asked, her voice low and steady. I nodded. We were a united front, a queen and her chosen heir, ready to reclaim a corrupted kingdom. The boardroom was silent as we entered. The old guard, the men who had enabled my husband and his brother, stared at us with thinly veiled hostility. I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the table and placed my leather-bound portfolio down with a soft, definitive thud. Effective immediately, I began, my voice ringing clear in the tense silence. We are implementing a new code of ethics. You'll find the documents in your inbox. Read them, sign them, or clean out your desks. I looked at each of them in turn, my eyes lingering on the CFO who had helped them funnel money. He looked away first. With Eleanor's unwavering support, we purged the company of their toxic legacy. We fired the sycophants and the yes-men. We installed new accounting software with transparent multi-layered approval processes. No more shady withdrawals. No more business expenses that were really payments for their lavish lifestyles. We shifted the company's focus from aggressive, risky acquisitions to sustainable, client-centered growth. The irony was so rich it was almost sweet. The business they had used as a piggy bank for their schemes was now becoming more profitable than ever, precisely because we had cut out the cancer they represented. At home, my life found a new, gentle rhythm. The chaos of the past year subsided, replaced by the quiet hum of a life I was building on my own terms. I learned the simple pleasure of drinking tea while watching the sunrise through my kitchen window, my hand resting on the early swell of my belly. This new life growing within me was the only prize that mattered. I hired a contractor to build a bookshelf that stretched from the floor to the ceiling in the living room. I filled it with books I wanted to read, not the pretentious art volumes Mark had collected for show. I bought a ridiculously soft, oversized armchair and placed it right where the sun pooled in the afternoon. This was my sanctuary. My peace was no longer tied to a man's presence or approval. It was woven into the very fabric of this house, fed by my own strength and resilience. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of baby clothes, a small, sealed envelope fluttered out. It was my handwriting. I'd written it to myself the night I found the vasectomy report. I sat in my new armchair, the sun warming my back, and opened it. "You are alone," it read. Asterisk, "He has taken everything, but you are still here. You are still breathing. So fight." Asterisk, I didn't cry. I smiled. I folded the note and tucked it back into the box, a relic from a former version of myself. She was brave, but she was fighting in the dark. I was now standing in the sun, victorious. The fight was over. The rebuilding was complete, and it was more beautiful than anything I could have ever imagined. The air in the lawyer's office was cold, recycled, and smelled of antiseptic and failure. It was the perfect setting for the final act. I saw Mark one last time, seated across the polished mahogany table. He was a hollowed-out version of the man I once loved. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, as if his lies had been the padding that once filled him out. The arrogant glint in his eyes was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic fear that made his hands tremble slightly on the tabletop. He looked at me, and I saw the plea forming in his gaze before his lips even moved. He tried to speak, to offer some meager, worthless apology. I want you to know I didn't let him finish. I held up a single hand, a clean, silent gesture that cut through his words like a guillotine. I didn't need his words. His apologies were just more currency in an economy I had bankrupted. My victory was my closure. It was a solid, tangible thing, resting in my chest where the ice used to be. My lawyer, a formidable woman in a sharp black suit, slid the final document toward me. The pen felt cool and light in my hand. I didn't hesitate. I didn't scan the lines of legalese. I knew what they said. They said I was free. They said I had won. I signed my name with a flourish, the ink a permanent, black stamp on the end of his world. I stood up. The movement was smooth, deliberate. I didn't look at him again. I didn't need a final image of his broken face to carry with me. I had everything I needed. I had the memory of the panic in his eyes when he realized his money was gone. I had the echo of his brother's frantic voice on the recording I'd made. I had the quiet, steadfast support of his own mother, who had handed me the keys to his destruction. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking a steady, final rhythm on the tile floor. I felt his gaze on my back, a weak, sputtering thing. I didn't turn. I didn't pause. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the hallway. The difference was instantaneous. The sterile, suffocating air of the office was replaced by the warm, natural light streaming through a large window at the end of the corridor. I walked towards it, a sense of weightlessness rising in me with every step. It was over. Truly over. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the building and emerged onto the sun-drenched street. The city noise, which I usually found grating, sounded like a symphony of life. A bus hissed to a stop, people laughed on a corner, a dog barked in the distance. It was all real, unfiltered, and mine. I placed a hand on my stomach, feeling the firm, round curve of my daughter. She kicked, a strong, insistent flutter, as if in celebration. This was my future, not a future built on the rotten foundation of Mark's lies, but one I had constructed myself, brick by brick, with my own 2 hands. It was forged in the fire of his betrayal and tempered in the cold certainty of my revenge. I had gone into that office as a wife, a victim, a plaintiff. I walked out as a mother, a CEO, a victor. I had taken every single thing they tried to steal from me and multiplied it. I had taken their betrayal and turned it into my liberation. I hailed a cab and slid into the back seat, giving the driver the address to my new home, the smaller, sunnier house, with the ridiculous armchair and the bookshelf filled with my books. As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the building shrinking in the distance. There was nothing left for me there. My life, my real, honest, peaceful life, was waiting for me, and it was more beautiful than any revenge I could have ever imagined. The sun paints gold on my daughter's hair as she chases a butterfly across the lawn. This is my life now, a life of honesty and peace. I rebuilt my world not from the ashes Mark left, but from the unshakable foundation of my own resilience. Their betrayal was the crucible, my liberation is the prize. My phone buzzes sometimes with news of them, filtered through my former mother-in-law, who is now more of a mother to me than my own ever was. Mark and Daniel are shadows, working menial jobs to pay off the debt they still owe me. A monthly reminder etched in their bank statements. The money is irrelevant now. The symbolism is everything. It is the echo of my victory. I run the company with a calm ferocity I never knew I possessed. The business they built on ego and shortcuts now thrives on transparency and quality. My mother-in-law sits on the board, her sharp eyes missing nothing. We turned their legacy into something they wouldn't even recognize, something good. Sometimes, when I sign a major deal, I think of the look on Mark's face in that lawyer's office, the hollowed-out terror. I feel nothing but a quiet, clean satisfaction, not hatred, not rage, just the absence of the poison that once ran through my veins. My daughter is the true testament to this new life. She has my eyes, but her spirit is entirely her own, fierce, curious, and unafraid. I will never lie to her. When she is old enough to understand, I will tell her a story, not a story about a bad man, but a story about a woman who was betrayed and chose to save herself. I will teach her that trust is earned, that her own mind is her greatest weapon, and that no one can ever build a cage for her that she cannot break. This morning, we planted a tree in the backyard, a young, sturdy oak. She helped, her small hands patting the soil around the base, so it can grow big and strong. "Mama," she said, her voice full of purpose. I looked at her, then at the tree, and finally at this sun-filled house that holds no ghosts. This is the legacy I am building, one of strong, deep roots and branches that reach for the light. I think of the woman I was a year ago, clutching a positive pregnancy test in a cold, marble bathroom, my world shattering. I thought I was being broken. I was wrong. I was being forged. The fire of his lies and the ice of my revenge tempered me into something new, something harder and brighter. I took their betrayal and turned it into my liberation. And you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have crumbled? Would you have forgiven? Or would you have found that cold, quiet place inside yourself, the one that whispers that you are worth more, that you are stronger than they could ever imagine? Would you have fought? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.